Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's Ukraine War News Update, third part thereof for the 22nd of February 2024. We're just going to skip through some geopolitical news concerning the Ukraine War, starting first with the UK. It is under the spotlight with an analysis from Sky News on how British companies are bolstering Vladimir Putin's war machine. A depressing thread, says Ed Conway, but an important one with some pretty shocking charts. Let's begin with the official picture. It suggests UK trade with Russia has collapsed since February 2022, down 74%, and you can see that there. This is, I presume, using this analysis from Sky News that basically doesn't present a very rosy picture for the UK, similar to what we've seen with the US, with Germany, with a lot of nations. And like I keep saying, and it's not to get the US or the UK or Germany off the hook, it's just so difficult. I don't know how you police this. I don't know how you stop these components, particularly dual-use components, getting abroad. Anyway, Russian invasion, official exports to Russia absolutely slumped. And then now let's fill in the data. Look how we're no longer exporting cars or heavy machinery to Russia because the government is well aware that stuff could be repurposed into weapons. So the official line is that this is a big success story. Looks like Russia's economy is being starved. But clearly the Russian economy isn't doing this badly at all. Indeed, Russia is due to grow faster than any G7 nation this year. Interestingly, Brian Ivy on my threads was saying that, do you know what? Looking from stats that the UK government put together in the Second World War, the German economy, they were trying to predict whether the German economy would collapse. And once you put your economy on a war footing, you can kind of sustain an economy for a lot longer, although you're having to basically use slave labor to produce military stuff. And that's all you're really doing, food and weapons. There is a large element of that, so that it's not as if that's the perfect state of being, economically speaking, but you can sustain a nation's economy by getting onto a war footing. Anyway, as he says, and that's just the economy. Now look at the battlefield, and Russia is looking very strong, no shortage of weapons, drones, etc., despite sanctions. Why? We could argue those points, but generally speaking, I mean, they have huge stockpiles. I don't know that they can manufacture at the rate they're losing at the moment, but we'll see. Well, let's imagine you're a Russian unit needing weapons. Imagine you rely on a certain input or tool from the UK. Back in the past, you get it directly, but you can't anymore. Here's one solution: set up a shell company in a friendly Caucasus state like Kyrgyzstan. The genius of this is that there's no sanctions on these other neighboring states, but once your goods arrive, you can send them straight over to Russia. They've been laundered. Voila, Russia gets its machinery, which it can use to make weaponry, etc., in spite of the sanctions, which raises a question: is this kind of thing actually happening? Well, let's look at the UK exports to Kyrgyzstan, and indeed, not really. Oh, that's because it's a video, and ask the question: why have they gone up since the outbreak of the war? Well, let's have a look. So Kyrgyzstan, just like we've seen with Germany, just like we've seen with other nations, with the UK, our exports to Kyrgyzstan have gone nuts. That's up by more than 1,100%. And nota bene, these aren't just any goods. They're precisely the machinery and car imports we have no longer sent to Russia. We can no longer send to Russia, all going to Kyrgyzstan, and then almost certainly onwards to Russia. Though the paper trail tends to end when goods leave UK. So I don't know. Maybe the one thing you can do is make it incumbent upon exporters to have good reason to think that they won't end up in Russia, and if that's not good enough, I mean, there has to be some serious oversight, then you can hammer those exporters. So I guess maybe there are simple ways of doing this, but I'm no expert in sanctions, right? It's a similar story in Armenia and in many other Caucasus nations, a massive leap post-invasion and sanctions. This absolutely needs to stop happening. Nor is this just a UK-specific story, not in the slightest. In fact, I've talked about this previously with Germany and the US. If anything, the volumes from Germany and Poland are worse. Robin Brooks has been documenting this via EU figures for months. He's a must follow for more on this extraordinary underreported story, and indeed that's who I've been dipping into, I think, previously. And there's more, I'm afraid, because the issue isn't just the surge in volumes of trade of these Caucasus nations or to these nations, but precisely what kinds of things we've been exporting to these countries. So I've looked into at those numbers, and what emerged is even more disturbing. Starting point is to note the EU and G7 partners have a list of what they call common high priority items. It's 45 categories of goods we know the Russians find important and are repurposing into weapons because we found them on the battlefield. Which raises the question, are these items among the stuff Britain is sending to these states, which anyone with an ounce of sense must know are being diverted to Russia? The answer is yes. Very much yes. Here's a chart specifically looking at these items. The items we know are being used to kill Ukrainians. What you can see here is trade flows specifically of these banned items to these states, who then almost certainly send them straight to Russia. There's a 500% increase. Now let's look at the specific line items we're talking about here. These are the main banned goods. UK companies are sending to 4 Russian neighbours. Top 1, parts of aeroplanes, helicopters or unmanned aircraft. In other words, parts you can use to make or repair drones. It's not looking good, is it? A few things. The absolute numbers are not massive, but add up the figures across the EU, and it's much bigger. And then consider stuff going via Turkey and China. Real story is trend. Sorry, I described Kyrgyzstan as a Caucasus nation. It's Central Asia. Whoops. Anyway, here he has written that up in a full story, but you'll find that in the Sky News piece as well. This is just... it's depressing that we know what the right thing to do is, and we seem to be unable to make sure the right thing happens. And Russia still get to make their weapons and still get to be aggressive and kill Ukrainians. On the other hand, the UK has imposed new sanctions against Russia. The list includes top managers of diamond mining company Alrosa and gas company Novatek, the Arctic LNG-2 liquefied natural gas extraction and production project, and AGD Diamonds, a diamond mining company, were also included in British sanctions. In addition, 3 companies from China, 2 from Belarus, 1 each from Turkey and UAE fell under new restrictions. Good news there, and that needs to continue. Denmark has announced the signing of a 10-year security guarantee agreement with Ukraine. There's a lot of that going on at the moment. This was announced by Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen. Right, interesting point here. I meant to say this yesterday. Mette Frederiksen is someone who was touted as being the next NATO Secretary General, as was Ursula von der Leyen. Olaf Scholz says no to Ursula von der Leyen because, she's been too prickly with Russia. But from what I can gather, the reality is that these two are unlikely to be the next Secretary General. It's more likely to be Mark Rutte from the Netherlands because he's a man and these two are women. You may think that sounds like sexist, and it kind of is, but it's on account of, apparently, this was the talk supposedly going on during the Munich Security Conference, as according to journalists like Francis Farrell, is that, honestly, Donald Trump would not have... He would have worsened relationships with NATO had it been a woman in charge, is basically what the thinking was. And so there's been all this conversation going on with world leaders, particularly European leaders, as to who should be in charge of NATO. And it looks like basically if Donald Trump gets to president in November 2024 this year, then there needs to be a strong male leader of NATO. That is the thinking. That's what's been going on. Don't shoot the messenger. Just relaying that to you. I just found that particularly interesting. And it's a shame, Ursula von der Leyen, although, you could argue that she's got a poor form in her position as defence minister previous to her EU position. It wasn't universally liked in that role, but Frederiksen, I'm sure, seems fine. I like Kaja Kallas a lot at the moment. I wonder where she's going forward, the Estonian leader. Lithuania is to close 2 more border crossings with Belarus. Lithuania previously shut down 2 of its 6 border crossings in August. The new announcement means that only 2 checkpoints will remain open on the Lithuanian-Belarusian border. Russia is setting informational conditions for more chaos in Bosnia and Herzegovina and Kosovo. Today, Putin, so these are the Balkan states in southeastern Europe. Today, Putin met with Dodik, and the Russian Telegram channel has accused Germany of preparing a war in Bosnia. Also, they accuse the UK of plotting war in Kosovo. Usually I write about the big picture, says Ivana Stradner, RE the Balkans and Russia, and is that Serbian strategy behind it. Today, I just want to share 2 disinformation pieces from Russian Telegram channels that are telling. They claim Germany continues to prepare the Bosniaks for a new conflict. Quote, the German government has allocated 6.5 million euros in the 2024 budget for the purchase of uniforms and infrastructure projects in the Bosnia-Herzegovina armed forces. Then they claim, quote, despite the fact that the BIH armed forces is headed to by a Serb, it is still a very complex and Serbophobic structure. There were also real attempts to kill Serbs. At the same time, the Bosniak side of the armed forces of the BIH is actively radicalizing. So this is kind of stirring the pot in the Balkans. These are Russian Telegram channels stirring that pot. So then they discuss Germany's soldiers to Bosnia and the EUFOR mission, and mention Prijedor and Bielina, and conclude that the latest visit by the German Defense Ministry shows that Berlin will continue its anti-Serbian policy in Bosnia. Why does this matter? Okay, Dodik will continue to blackmail the West with successionist threats and expand his ties to Russia. Meanwhile, they are setting informational conditions to justify new conflict because of radical Muslims, so they have to defend Orthodox Christianity. I've been following migration disinformation on Telegram, and it's unbelievable how they talk about armed immigrants on the border, something you should follow if your work focuses on the border in the Balkans. There's more. Now, Kosovo. Russia and Serbia have a long history of accusing UK of plotting war in Kosovo. Now they accuse the UK intelligence of collecting information from locals to keep their finger on the pulse. As I say, they argue that the pattern is always a prelude to war. I've been following Russia and Serbian disinformation for a long time, and they always write things about new escalations when in fact they plan to escalate. So that's that projection thing that Russia does, saying, oh look, these guys are meddling to get to as a prelude to war, and it's actually the Russians doing that and throwing that onto other people. Anyway, just a little insight to Russian disinformation campaigns and, you know, hornet nest poking in the Balkans. Right. Quote, the new US sanction package will follow the direction we had until now, choke off the Russian military war machine and target their military industrial complex, as well as the sanctions related to the death of Navalny, says spokesman Matthew Miller. Now, a couple of things. One, what we've just been talking about with the UK, which is, yep, sanctions are great unless you can easily get around them by sending all your stuff to the Caucasus or Central Asian nations. So that's your issue. And 2, this really needs to be big on Friday when they announce it, because that Navalny death had prompted Biden previously to say there would be massive consequences to that, devastating consequences, I think he said. And if it's not that, then he's not maintaining his word there. Andrew Perpetua says, isn't it weird how congressmen who are against giving aid to Ukraine are the same congressmen who just got caught working with an informant who worked with the FSB? So I'm going to go back to the conversation about Smirnov, who's this informant involved in the Hunter Biden Burisma scandal thing that the Republicans have been trying to hang on Joe Biden to try and get Joe Biden impeached. And the informant, one of their key witnesses, has found to be, he's been arrested for lying, FBI informant, and has connections. Basically, according to him, all the information came from Russian intelligence. In other words, the whole the whole Joe Biden, Hunter Biden thing seems to have Russian fingerprints all over it. Now, I was called out by several people. I'm trying to work out whether they're genuine, like Americans, or actually Russian trolls. But people saying, I'm really disappointed in this video because they're so deep in the Hunter Biden thing that I don't give a toss about Hunter Biden. He's nothing to do with anything as far as I'm concerned. And if he's guilty of anything, fine, brilliant. Lock him up, do whatever. I don't, whatever. He's a human being that may or may not have done dodgy things. He's got drug problems, etc., etc. Okay. But it's irrelevant. Nothing I say has anything to do with Hunter Biden. All I'm interested in is 1, Russian disinformation, 2, Russian interference, and 3, whether Joe Biden is actually impeachable, because he's the president of the US, and that's pretty damned important. Now, on those things, it is not looking good for particularly Republicans who believe that Joe Biden is impeachable and that there genuinely was dodgy stuff going on with Ukrainian energy company Burisma. Now, let's look at the larger US context before returning to this idea of Burisma. So, alongside all that's going on, we've got Republican congressmen who are stopping aid, and they appear to be the same people who are shouting about the whole Joe Biden Burisma thing that appears to have just completely fallen apart, with the main informant being completely dodgy. Now, Donald Trump has revealed his vice presidential candidates, all of them reject US aid to Ukraine. So the list of vice presidential picks includes 3 of Trump's former rivals, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, Tim Scott, the South Carolina senator, and person whose nose is so far up Donald Trump's backside, I can't believe it, and entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy, who just spouts Russian propaganda. Other potential candidates include South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem, US House member Byron Donalds, don't know him, and former House member Tulsi Gabbard, who left the Democratic Party in 2022, but my goodness, she spouts some pro-Russian stuff too. It's just, So then it's really interesting to look at what, for example, Donald Trump has said previously. So this is what he said in 2020 about Alexei Navalny and who do you think poisoned him when he was poisoned before he was then imprisoned, right? And as Ron Filipkowski says here, it's really sad that not one reporter or interviewer, including last night, so he had a town hall last night, has ever asked Trump this question again after he dodged it the first time in 2020. Not one. And he was asked, well, let's see, it's not very loud.
Who do you think poisoned Alexei Navalny
Who do you think poisoned Alexei Navalny in Russia?
We'll talk about that at another time.
Who do you think?
He's so weak on Russia. And we'll talk about that another time. He can't say. Joe Biden, for his credit, has come out and he's gone hard. And he's been quite strong on, what's gone on with Alexei Navalny. And we're waiting to see whether the sanctions will follow. Before it even happened, Trump said, well, but just about his poisoning, don't want to answer that question. Ask me another time. Next. And then when he did a post on Alexei Navalny, he said nothing about Alexei Navalny, nothing about Russia, and just spent the whole post saying that America's terrible, it's gone down a pan. And Alexei Navalny's death has somehow shown that. Anyway, we're now going to just talk very quickly about Lev Parnas, because he's coming out, he's got a book coming out. He's a guy that was involved in being sent to, so he's Ukrainian, being sent to Ukraine by Rudy Giuliani, who's Trump's lawyer, with another guy, Igor Fruman, and sent to Ukraine to dig up dirt on Joe Biden. So late in 2018, Giuliani dispatched the two to Ukraine in search for damaging information on Trump's US political rivals, according to the New York Times. Quote, their mission was to find people and information that could be used to undermine the special counsel's investigation and also to damage former Vice President Joe Biden. Both were at the center of pro-Trump forces' push to remove Ambassador Yovanovitch So they needed to get rid of an ambassador because her loyalty to Trump was deemed insufficient. It was reported that the two also pressed for support for allegations that former Ukrainian officials schemed to manipulate the 2016 election to support Hillary Clinton by revealing adverse information about Paul Manafort, chairman of Trump's campaign, which became a central element in Robert Mueller's special counsel investigation. Okay, loads of information going on here. You'll see why this is all important in a second. It's about joining this stuff up. So before you do anything this for the rest of the day, if you haven't already, go and watch Active Measures on Amazon Prime. So Active Measures is a documentary that's it's the fullest documentary of data and information I think I've ever seen. It's just like information on the connections of Paul Manafort to Russia and Paul Manafort to Trump and his campaign, and how this is all connected, right? And that at base, you've got Russia interfering with American elections, American electoral mechanisms and institutions, and just general disinformation. Right. So Lev Parnas is involved. So Lev Parnas has then since been kind of done in for this, and he's come out and said an awful lot. Here is Lev Parnas with a former FBI guy, I think, talking on MSNBC. Yes, left wing, all that. But let's listen to what Lev Parnas says about this Biden informant, the Burisma informant, the FBI guy Smirnov, FBI informant, who has now been seen to be completely unreliable, a liar, and getting his information from Russian intelligence sources, FSB handlers.
Within a half an
So
hour.
wait, let me just back up for just 1 second. You were born in Ukraine.
Sorry, oops. I've got that set on 1.7 times 5. So he was born in Ukraine, which she's about to say, Lev Parnas.
Right? Back when it was part of the Soviet Union, you are Ukrainian. And so this whole idea, all the Black Ledger stuff, the allegation was supposed to be that Joe Biden and Hunter Biden, when Joe Biden was vice president, were taking bribes to protect this company Burisma that Hunter Biden sat on the board of, right? Is that the same story that you were also peddling? And do you now say that that story was made up?
Absolutely. That was the same story, and I've been...
His job was to find information to show that the Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, Burisma thing was true. He's the main guy, and he's very clearly saying it was made up. So if you guys are out there who are still like dead into this whole Burisma thing, just, I don't know.
saying that it was...
Story was made up.
Absolutely. That was the same story, and I've been saying that it was made up for the past 4 years. Ever since my arrest, I've been screaming at the top of my lungs that it was made up. And not only was it made up, I've also shown the world that the people that were doing it were Russian agents that were, and Giuliani never cared. Giuliani never cared. Solomon never cared. Fox News never cared. None of them cared, as long as it fit their narrative.
Yeah.
And that was the...
This is so bloody important, right? Because, like, people who sit and watch Fox News or any news, you can say MSNBC, but it's about, like, data. Like, if you just listen to the narrative and go along with that narrative, and because you want it to be true, because you hate Joe Biden, you hate the Democrats that much, that you hear something that goes against that, you go, right, hook, line, and sinker. And then when you're saying that for 4 years, or however long it's been, you're saying that for long enough. The problem is you've got the sunk cost fallacy, which means that I've invested all this time and effort into this, and if I say that it's all BS, then it makes me look stupid. So I have to hold on to this. And even if the people who are responsible for actually being the core data in selling me this narrative say overtly and openly, as Lev Parnas does here, it's BS, and even if the informant is now being arrested for lying, I can't accept that's the truth. So I attack people like Jonathan M.S. Pierce for saying this on YouTube and say, you don't know what you're talking about. This is a disappointing video because blah, blah, blah. But it's not dealing with what's going on and what people are saying. And I think it's so important. But also, you had, and this is what the important part here is, so news sources like Fox News and their anchors and the politicians as well, who were consistently saying that the Smirnov was reliable. He's reliable. He's amazing. You had Sean Hannity saying how amazing he is. You had, what's that other chap? Can't remember. Other Fox News anchors saying he's amazing. He's amazing, amazing. He's so reliable, yada, yada, yada. And yet, apparently at the time, they knew he wasn't reliable. Then you are being lied to.
Information that was pushed.
And who fed you that story?
It was a bunch of people. Most of them had ties to Russian oligarchs or Russian agents or Russian government officials. Some of them were actual Ukrainian officials that also had ties, but at the end, it was all the same people pushing the same story that was coming from the same source, Russia.
Right. And the goal of the story was to make Biden look corrupt so that it would negate Donald Trump's alleged ties to Russia and make it look like Biden was on the take from Ukraine. Is that correct?
Oh, that was a combination, yeah. First of all, it was that, but also Trump was so scared of losing to Biden, he thought it would be an embarrassment that they wanted to seal it by getting Biden out of the race by showing how corrupt it was and not giving him a chance.
So let me bring you in, Naveed, because you, served as a double agent. You know how this works. Is that how it works? That a Russian operative or Russian agents gets to somebody like our friend Lev here and says, hey, this is a story I want you to push. And then it goes into the ecosystem and then that works. But if he also has an FBI handler and then he's telling that guy the story, that's a crime, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're right on both parts. I mean, Joy, this feels like we've been here before. It's like WikiLeaks, Carter Page, and all of that rolled into one. You know, for people who maybe just have lived under a rock for the last 8 years, I'll say this, as I've said it before, for Russia, the Cold War never ended. United States is Vladimir Putin's main enemy. He is seeking to undermine not just democracy. It's not about necessarily putting a thumb on the scale for Biden or Trump, although intelligence assessment says that he prefers Trump. The reality is that he wants to see a weakened United States. I mean, we talked about the death of Navalny, but the other big news that happened this week is that it was announced that Russia is trying to put a nuke into space. I mean, this is a man, unlike 2016, unlike 2020, he is at war in Ukraine, losing badly. He is desperate, and this makes him incredibly dangerous. So why wouldn't he try to interfere with the election? Why wouldn't he try to undermine Joe Biden? It just, just makes total sense with everything we've seen the last 8 years.
I don't want to be like partisan here, but they are doing this. Russia is doing this in the US, it's doing it in Germany, it's doing it in the UK, it's doing it in France. This is what they do because this is what they have success in doing, right? They're not so good at doing war, actually. They're not very good at committing to combined arms maneuvers in different countries, Afghanistan, Ukraine. But what they are good at doing is spreading disinformation and screwing up democratic institutions and mechanisms in foreign countries. And we need to be really wary here. What I don't want you to do is, if you're a really big fan of Trump or a really big, staunch Republican, to just dismiss this. This should be a worry to people on both sides of the aisle in the US, and it should be a worry to basically every citizen who respects democracy around the world. This is the big challenge. Like I keep saying, one of my raisons d'etre is to fight against disinformation from Russia here. This is how it's manifesting itself. It's a tremendous worry. Now, to go further, this is Ken Buck. Now, Ken Buck is a conservative, right? He's argued with Marjorie Taylor Greene, okay, and people like that. So he's not a big fan of some elements of the Republican Party, but. This is Representative Ken Buck revealing that Comer and Jim Jordan, who were people who were wanting to impeach these big impeachers who were using Smirnov, were warned that the former FBI informant's claims against Biden were not credible, but they, quote, went out and talked to the public about how this was credible and how it was damning. So this is what I'm going back to talk about, these lawmakers or TV journalists, anchors saying Smirnov is credible, and they knew he wasn't at the time. So that is lying to you. If you took that in hook, line, and sinker, you were being lied to.
Looking at what you said last September, you were condemning your own party's impeachment efforts, saying that Republicans in the House who are itching for an impeachment inquiry are relying on an imagined history. Did you ever think that it would collapse in this spectacular of a fashion?
Well, Caitlin, it's even more of an imagined history now. Obviously, this witness, and we were warned at the time that we received the document outlining this witness's testimony. We were warned.
At the time.
The credibility of this statement was not known, and yet people My colleagues went out and talked to the public about how this was credible and how it was damning and how it proved President Biden's, at the time, Vice President Biden's complicity in receiving bribes.
In psychology, it's called motivated reasoning, right? If you want something to be so true, or you don't even not care if it's true, if you want the result of that so badly, we want Joe Biden to be screwed over, right? So we're either happily lie about it, or I will give credence to information that would support Joe Biden getting screwed over. I would give that so much credibility that I won't even question it, and I won't even do due diligence on my sources. Then this is where you get to. It's that desperation to screw over the other side so much.
It appears to absolutely be false and to really undercut the nature of the charges. We've always been looking for a link between what Hunter Biden received in terms of money and Joe Biden's activities, or Joe Biden receiving money. This clearly is not a credible link at this point.
So James Comer and Jim Jordan, they knew that this was not corroborated information, yet they still went public with it, talked about it on television, used it to fuel these investigations regardless?
That's what it appears. I certainly didn't have any evidence outside the statement itself that it was credible. And as a prosecutor for 25 years, Caitlin, I never went to the public until I could prove the reliability of a statement. And even then, the only public statement a prosecutor makes is the charging document. Let's see what the evidence is in this impeachment, if there is more evidence, before going forward.
It really infuriates me, this kind of stuff. Right, moving on. Russian propaganda again. I say moving on, it's still the same kind of topic. Russian propaganda exploits the protests of Polish farmers, manipulating narratives in both Ukraine and Poland. Igor Tshishevich, a UIF expert, emphasizes the importance for Ukraine and Poland to discern the core issue, preventing it from escalating into a matter of national and societal relations. Quote, Ukraine should counter Russian propaganda through proactive information operations. The Russian Federation employs diverse tactics, including the use of bots and funding from various organizations. Addressing this challenge requires proactive measures, a responsibility shared by the Ukrainian government and diplomatic service, he explained. Now, this is a real problem, these border issues. There's been lots on this already today, and it's worth just sharing some with you. It's somewhat good news, or it's looking at least a little bit more positive. Sorry, I just moved my tabs around accidentally. Right, Poland border update. In the last few minutes, Donald Tusk has announced the military and humanitarian cargo will be allowed through the Ukraine border. He said crossings with Ukraine will be added to a list of critical infrastructure. So this is good news. Ukraine's fate hangs in the balance, said Donald Tusk. I don't need to convince anyone that this means that our fate also hangs in the balance. They're going to meet. Polish and Ukrainian officials will meet to sort this out good and proper, but border crossings with Ukraine will be added to the list of critical infrastructure. And that will give the guarantee of all military and humanitarian aid reaching Ukraine without delays. So important that. And I believe, I thought I had somewhere else, that the meetings are due. And obviously, Zelensky's been talking about this quite explicitly a lot recently. And lastly, the Russian pilot who defected and landed that helicopter and then went off to Spain. He was warned by Ukrainians, not really happy with you defecting to Spain because it's dangerous there. Well, I think it was Alicante he was done over in, and Alicante has a big Russian diaspora community. There's 90,000 in Spain and maybe 20,000 of them in Alicante. So, it's unsurprising that he was shot. Spanish intelligence services are convinced that Moscow is behind the murder of the Mi-8 pilot. The newspaper notes that El País, notes that the Spanish government is very cautious in publicly commenting on the situation, especially regarding the possible involvement of Russia. But Spanish intelligence services have no doubt that the Kremlin is behind the pilot's murder. The newspaper sources among diplomats say that the case is very serious. If the involvement of the Russian authorities is confirmed, Spain will give a decisive response. Interesting stuff there from Spain. it's a shame that someone that's done the thing that's pretty brave gets rewarded with assassination. And from a personal note, I think the FSB are onto me. My local pub burnt down last night. There were 10 fire engines. You had to call fire engines from Dorset, Hampshire. It's on the coast. It's a beautiful pub. My childhood, my adolescence was misspent in that pub, drinking many pints of Tanglefoot. And quite frankly, I'm absolutely gutted it burnt down last night. And if that's you, Putin, if you burnt down my local pub, I will fricking come to Moscow and I will find you. I will find you and I will poke your eyes out with a spoon. No one messes with my pint of Tanglefoot. Anyway, enough from me. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Take care. Speak soon.